Modern War Institute's Irregular Warfare Initiative, Princeton's Empirical Studies of Conflict, and Harvard Kennedy School's Defense Project, for joining us today for our virtual program focusing on irregular warfare in the context of Eastern Europe. My name is Guido Torres, and I'm a National Security Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School and the new Director of Engagements for IWI.
G'day everyone, my name's Andy Marr and I'm the former Engagements Director for IWI. Today's program, Resistance to Russian Aggression, is a multifaceted topic that we'll work to address in the time provided. However, our panel of practitioners and experts will aim to explore and discuss how the resistance operating concept and total defence figure into efforts to deter and counter Russian aggression, especially given the shift toward more traditional conflict in Eastern Europe.
The Irregular Warfare Initiative and Defense Project are proud to bring these discussions to the IW community. Those of you who are practitioners, researchers, or policymakers dealing with the complexities of today's IW landscape on a daily basis. For those of you unfamiliar with IWI, our mission is to bridge the gap between scholars and practitioners through events such as this, but also our podcast, editorial content, and non-resident fellows program. We're a team of about 40 volunteers from all different professional backgrounds who are passionate about the future of irregular warfare and putting research and solutions into the field.
For today's event, we're thrilled to partner with NATO's Special Operations Headquarters, and in particular with the moderator for today's event, Doug Livermore, who we wish to publicly thank for helping to bring this event together.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions for the panel, please submit your comments via Twitter, which we're actively monitoring, and we'll pass them to our moderator. The session is also being recorded and will be available after today's events through the Irregular Warfare Initiative website and social media channels. As is always the case, the views expressed today are those of the participants and do not reflect the official views of West Point, Princeton University, Harvard Kennedy School, NATO, or any other private or government organization.
I'd now like to introduce our panelists for the discussion today. Lieutenant General Tony Fletcher is a United States Army Lieutenant General who serves as Commander of NATO's Special Operations Headquarters and has done since October 15, 2021. He most recently served as a Deputy Director of the Defence Threat Reduction Agency from August 2020 to September 2021. Previously, he has served as a Commander of Special Operations Command South 2018 through 2020.
Secretary General Petri Toivonen leads the Secretariat of the Security Committee for the Finnish Ministry of Defense, which assists the Finnish government and ministries in comprehensive security matters. The committee follows the Finnish security environment and development of society, in addition to coordinating the proactive preparation related to comprehensive security.
Brigadier General Riho Ühtegi is the Estonian Brigadier General, currently serving as the commander of the Estonian Defence League. Previously, he has served as a commander of all Estonian Special Operations Forces from 2012 through to 2019. He brings to his current position an extensive and unconventional experience in law enforcement, intelligence, and special operations, giving him unique insights into total defense concepts and deterrence against Russian aggression.
Nataliya Bugayova is a non-resident fellow at the Institute for the Study of War, where she previously led the Russia research team. Her focus is on analysis of the Kremlin's decision-making and Russia's military and information operations globally. Prior to ISW, she was the CEO of the Kiev Post, Ukraine's independent English language publication, and also took part in the economic reform efforts in Ukraine after the 2014 Euromaidan Revolution. But most importantly, she's also a proud HKS alumni.
Guiding the conversation this morning is IWI non-resident fellow Doug Livermore. Doug is a Senior Intelligence Officer and Director of Special Operations, Irregular Warfare, Special Programs and Sensitive Activities for the Deputy Under-Secretary of the Navy. Additionally, he is a Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel in the Army National Guard, currently serving as a Deputy Commander of the Maryland Army National Guard Special Operations Detachment, NATO. Doug is National Director for External Communications for the Special Forces Association and is also a non-resident fellow with the US Joint Special Operations University. Mr. Livermore, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Andy. In 2019, Special Operations Command Europe published the Resistance Operating Concept, known shorthand as the ROC, which outlines how nations can build resiliency through the comprehensive defense or total defense methodology, setting the conditions prior to an invasion to allow for continued resistance against an occupying power. The ROC was drafted with the assumption that Russia might quickly overwhelm a vulnerable Eastern European NATO ally, though the occupied countries could continue resisting as NATO generated the necessary conventional combat power to counterattack in accordance with its Article 5 mutual defense obligations. SOCUR and other special operations forces have applied the ROC to create dilemmas for Russia, though the deterrent effect clearly failed in the renewal of their invasion of Ukraine. Still, since 2014, US SOF and their NATO SOF partners have worked closely and persistently with Ukrainian SOF to prepare for extended resistance in the event of Russian occupation elsewhere, and the impressive results we have seen are a direct reflection of those efforts, as well as the Ukrainian skill and courage. This support has included advisement on training, organization, and overall strategy to conduct a sustained resistance to Russia's occupation, as well as a blending of the full range of irregular warfare disciplines. Whereas the global war on terror saw SOF activities in the forefront of the conflict, or in many cases the main effort, we have seen in Ukraine that SOF activities such as unconventional warfare conducted in support of broader irregular warfare initiatives still provide incredibly important shaping effects in support of the conventional fight. The success of Ukraine's counteroffensives in Kharkiv and Kherson have each been preceded by extensive resistance efforts to destroy key Russian infrastructure like supply lines, depots, and command and control nodes. This is a model that will continue to prove successful, and we should study it in depth as an effective application of the resistance operating concept. Our four panelists have engaged in many different aspects of resistance activities and will share their insights with us today. They will each give a brief discussion of their areas of interest and points of view, followed by a general discussion. First up, Lieutenant General Fletcher.
Hey, first, I just want to say thanks to the team for this opportunity and the venue for all of us to gather in this collaborative environment to discuss strategic challenges and speak to what it is that we need to do to ensure we outpace the current threats and are prepared for the future challenges. As we all know, the character, technology, organizational structures, and some of the operations are always constantly changing. So a platform like this that you guys provide gives us an opportunity to look at what's relevant, enhance our effectiveness, and ultimately address how we approach warfare. And so thanks. From a NATO perspective, I think the success of NATO is really predicated on addressing collective challenges. We often talk about our shared approaches, and in the end, I think what we end up doing is offering multinational solutions in order to enhance a multi-domain battle going forward. And so I think that the unity of NATO is our center of gravity, and this opportunity, like others, gives us all to kind of get together, talk about what the right approaches are, or the best approaches, and then move out in that manner. One of the challenges that many of today's allies saw were created in response to a fight in Afghanistan and the broader conflict against extremist organizations. And I think that many have deployed, fought, and adapted their approaches largely as a result of those conflicts. And so as we go forward, that will be one of the areas in which I think NATO SOF headquarters, NATO writ large, will look to advance and adapt and evolve the application of SOF and the SOF effects and its approaches to ensure that we're meeting the needs of the current geopolitical environment. I think as we take a harder look at collective defense, NATO describes that basically around three core tasks. It's deterrence and defense, it's crisis prevention and management, and cooperative security. And in the 2022 NATO strategic concept, it actually prioritized deterrence and defense over the other core tasks. So for us, we know that's a priority for NATO, and we think SOF has a unique space in which to operate. So as a NATO theater SOF component, we're actually adapting SOF across the alliance to address these challenges. And I think today is another opportunity for me to actually hear and listen, learn, and then turn that into something actionable for NATO SOF. So thanks, and I look forward to today's discussion.
Thank you very much, sir. Next, we'll hear from Brigadier General Ühtegi.
Good afternoon. Actually, it's morning in USA. I would like to say that Estonia has using always total defense concept, and it's the only way how to actually keep our independence. We understand that as a frontline state, we have to use all assets we have. And probably Estonia was the last state in NATO who created special forces. So when we started to develop special forces, and we decided that our special forces must focus on unconventional warfare, because it's one part of defense, if we're talking about total defense concept. And we understood that we are not talking so much expeditionary unconventional warfare, but we need this unconventional warfare great inside of Estonia in the situation. So when I became chief of Estonian Special Forces, my main first task was start to create armed resistance capabilities in Estonia. And so we were working for 2 years almost when actually we started to work with US lead resistance operation concept. But already 2 years before that, we had many actions and many initiatives going on here in Estonia. So we were in pretty good situation when we came together in Poland, and we started to talk about resistance operation concepts this time. We made some proposals this time also, which were a little bit maybe crazy for someone, but according to the situation in Ukraine today, we see that it works. For example, we advise to keep a president on state even if it's occupied. And we know that in Ukraine, actually, President Zelensky is a person of resistance. He's like the statue of liberty of Ukraine at the moment. So and so on, so on. Very important is that if we're talking about resistance must be developed already a long time before a war. During a war, it's to start to create something like this, it's very difficult. So because of that, we decided that we have to prepare it before, and we can say that Estonia has pretty good situation, because SOF, as a force multiplier in case of unconventional warfare, has a partner here in Estonia, and this is the organization which I lead now. It's a defense league. So, but I think that we can continue during the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. Next up, Secretary General Toivonen, if you would, please.
Yeah, hello everybody, and thanks for the invitation. Pleasure to be here. And I represent the Finnish Security Committee, and sometimes people ask what is it about, and it's actually the coordinator of comprehensive security here in Finland. And people also ask sometimes that what is this comprehensive security about? And in short, it's the whole of a society approach on the preparedness, and it has long roots in our history. It's based on the total defense idea, and after Second World War, when we started to develop it, it was based on the idea of totally standalone. No help is going. We are not going to get any help. We need to stand alone. Possible strong enemy. And during the times, of course, it has developed along with the EU memberships, so that we are not so alone anymore. But it was also a kickstart of our societal resilience enhancing. And for example, during the years, we have been developing our National Emergency Supply Agency and supply system, and also the civil defense system. And at the moment, we are pretty proud of it. For example, sheltering places here in Finland, we are a small nation by the number of people, just 5.5 million people here in Finland. We have approximately 54,000 shelters and 4.4 million shelter places. So situation on that side, it's pretty good. But as a friend from Estonia mentioned, that we also see ourselves as a frontline state. And so it means that we need to be prepared. And it's a constant preparedness process what we are running through here in Finland, and Security Committee has a role in that one. And we see that to live a happy life, you need to be well prepared, and it needs the constant working on it, and in whole societal level between the officials, also including the business life, NGOs, and also the citizens. Citizens also have a role, and they have to understand the role in the preparedness. Our system, we have been living next to Russia for hundreds of years, and I think we will be in the same situation for incoming years as well. And we see our system as a threshold, and that means a deterrence. And being strong by ourselves, and now getting also under the bigger umbrella with you in a NATO, I think we will be stronger together. And we hope that maybe we can bring some of best practices from our system to NATO friends as well, and looking for the cooperation on that one. But maybe that's from my side at the moment. And pleasure to be here in the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We definitely appreciate your presence. And then finally, we'll hear from Nataliya.
Thank you, Doug. It's great to be here and part of such a distinguished panel. My path linked me to the issue of Russian aggression and resistance back in 2014, where I observed Russian military intervention and subversion activities on the ground in Ukraine, both in Kiev, where I was working at the time, but also in the east of Ukraine, where I'm originally from. And over the subsequent years, had a privilege to contribute to building an open source intelligence team focused on Russia at the Institute for the Study of War in Washington, D.C. And our approach has always been to look at Russia as a global actor and monitor both information and military activities, not just in the former Soviet Union, but in Europe and Africa and the Middle East, as well as various efforts to resist, successful and not, by various actors and countries to the Russian challenge. I think one of the main lessons we already learned from the current invasion is that resistance time and horizon matter, and viewing Putin as an opportunist by many over the years has stripped, I think, Ukraine and the West of some of that prep time, even though a lot of immunity has been built up over the years. But if fewer viewed Putin as a mere opportunistic predator and instead, I think, focused on the long series of actions and decisions that indicated unchanged intent regarding both Ukraine and NATO, more could have been done. And I think, therefore, the strategic intelligence capability to help recognize the tactical creep of Russia and other adversaries before it becomes their strategic gain is key, and this is part of where our work is on developing some of these in the open source. Thank you, and very much looking forward to today's conversation.
Thanks, Nataliya. And actually, that's a perfect segue to the first question that I wanted to pose to all the panelists. As we approach the 9th month of Russia's renewed invasion of Ukraine, we are seeing firsthand the effects resulting from the implementation of the resistance operating concept, or the broader resistance concepts that we've been discussing already, in increasing the resiliency of vulnerable nations faced with Russian aggression. What lessons should we take, and most importantly, implement in improving Eastern European resistance to Russian aggression elsewhere? And General Fletcher, we'll begin with you.
Hey, first, thanks for the question. As I think about your question, it's a lot to unpack, but I'll start. I think what we've witnessed in Ukraine, clearly the tenacity and resilience of the Ukrainian people has had an impact on the trajectory of the conflict. Their unwavering bravery, patriotism, I think are all just clear indicators of a strong national identity, and what we often refer to in the resistance operating concept as a national cohesion within a nation. And so I think they have to be applauded for that. And many of the battlefield successes can be directly attributed to this national cohesion. However, in many ways, I kind of characterize the Ukrainian approach to what they're doing more so at times toward territorial defense rather than the employment of a traditional resistance campaign. And so that's a little different than the question you asked. But for me, the Ukrainian people are using, I think, their creativity to defend against an invading adversary. And you see that they've successfully combined everything from crowdsourced intelligence, social media, overt guerrilla tactics, modern day, kind of modern, really mobile, man-portable anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles. And all this was designed really to counterbalance a numerically larger Russian conventional military capabilities that they saw. On the other hand, I think sometimes when we look at the pure nature of the resistance operating concept, it often describes resistance as a clandestine tradecraft to hide among the human terrain, conduct both armed and nonviolent resistance at the time and place of your choosing, and it's really about kind of countering and staying viable during an occupation. And so it's a little bit of a difference. And I only highlight that because I think we have to be careful in how we describe and characterize the Ukrainian effort and the conflict, and so we don't inadvertently start to go down a path where we learn or apply some of the wrong lessons because we've characterized it a little differently. But I think that what they're doing obviously is successful and must be applauded. As far as some of the soft specific contributions toward enhancing Eastern Europe resistance, this headquarters continues to look for ways to support the development of soft capabilities and capacity. And really what we work to do is try to create synergy across the broader soft network. And then this command is in a position to enable and fill many of those gaps, whether it's through doctrine, policy, education. And we look to engage in that space where appropriate. But we know that at the same time that building a resistance force is really the responsibility and the prerogative of the individual allied governments and their societies. The nation must decide for itself if they want and if they have the right capacity and capability to incorporate such concepts into their national defense strategies. But from a SOF perspective, SOF has three core tasks in the alliance for NATO. It's strategic reconnaissance, it's direct action, and it's military assistance. And so the core of SOF that across the alliance has this military assistance problem set and mission statement that it employs as a part of the national defense plans in most of the nations. And what SOF does in that environment, I think they leverage SOF as a force multiplier to connect with everything from their frontier forces to have some of the responses on the national level as well for national and domestic response requirements. And so in many ways, I think the SOF of the alliance serves as a force multiplier, which ties back into enabling, educating, and supporting resistance concepts as a part of a national defense strategy. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. And that's an excellent point you make about the changing nature of resistance, particularly as we look at implementation of new technologies and methodologies for decentralized organization, which, to your point, I think we've certainly seen play out in the ability of the Ukrainians to rapidly respond. And we've seen this replicated elsewhere with various territorial defense forces. Thank you, sir. General Ühtegi, over to you.
I understand that it's very important to understand that we should not underestimate nations' capabilities. So people as a nation. And that is something we saw in Ukraine. And when we start to create our total defense concepts, and we also focused very much on this. So there was always question about that. Where is the red tiny line between military and non-military part? That maybe we bring casualties by having total war, also to civilian society. So what we see today in Ukraine is that actually enemy doesn't care about that. Are they civilians or are they militaries, and they kill people in occupied territories without any problems. So in this situation, it's very important also, and I understood this when I was chief of special forces, that actually we should keep as much as long fighting, even not to fall under occupation time. So because of that, we decided that we should fight by using so-called non-linear battlefield situation, where we keep troops still on ground everywhere, and we don't let the enemy to let's say make any kind of peace moments, or let's say take off forces, because when they can do this, they start immediately clean the land. And it's one topic we learned actually from this situation in Ukraine, I think. And what was also not surprised, but even we know that Russia uses this kind of things always. It is how brutally actually they are acting against civilian population. So it's very important that also nation and people can understand in situations that if there will be an attack against our state, that there is no tools who can actually stay outside of fight. Everyone is a part of fight, because enemy doesn't care about that. Are they civilians or are they militaries? So, and one important thing is that I think that also what we learned from Ukraine till now is that, as I already said, networks for resistance and for guerrilla operations must be already on the ground. So you cannot start to build up them later, or let's say during a wartime. If you don't have them, then you have an empty space, and you have to send, let's say, reconnaissance or special troops on ground to get the information. Of course, local people can be very friendly, and they can give you information, but this is actually a dangerous operations. So because of that, we have been decided already for a long time that this territorial defense, where those troops who are living on this area where they are fighting, is the best way to defend areas and the territory. So basically, yeah, this is what I wanted to say.
No, thank you, sir. And that's another terrific point, particularly when we look to the preparation of the environment that's required to lay the groundwork for continued resistance. It's never too early to get started, particularly in light of what we've seen, Russian doctrine focusing on counterpartisan operations. They do tend to be somewhat effective in that regard. So as we start looking ahead to build up that long-term resistance capability, it is important to start building those networks now. So thank you very much, sir. Secretary General, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for very good points you took out. And okay, I'm Army Colonel myself as a background, but maybe I will try to look a little bit from the societal perspective according to my nowadays position. According to this whole society model, what we have, it's that actually everybody needs to understand why we are doing something, and that's something what Lieutenant General here referred as a national cohesion as well, and that's crucial for Finland as well. National cohesion and will to resist, and we have had very high numbers in will to resist if Finland is attacked for decades. But after 24th of February, when we had the next survey, the numbers went even more higher. So there is a very high will to defend country at the moment, and it looks that the statistics are going even higher. It's 83% at the moment. So in a way, it's in the DNA of Finns at the moment. But of course, we can never feel too comfortable about it. We need to constantly work on it as well to keep it high. but one thing is that we think that the base of the preparedness, it needs to be done during the good times, the peaceful times. And then when something happens, it will show its force. And in Finland, we are lucky to have had a parliamentary system on developing the military as well and the military capabilities. So there's always a parliamentary decision between the government and the oppositions on the developing the military, and we have been able to build the competence pretty well in the last years. But that's one thing. But the will to resist, it's definitely the most important, and we put it under umbrella of psychological resilience when we look at our whole society and where we need to put some effort. And when we want to enhance our psychological resilience, it means that we need to do education and we need to have a constant training. And that means in all societal levels as well. And for example, we have a national defense courses in Finland. We have one for the top level people, but also regionally. And that's actually way of making the business life, the NGOs, to understand their part on the preparations if something bad happens, but also when something has happened, what is their task and what they need to do. What I try to say here is that idea what we are following is the constant preparedness process. And one politician asked me some time ago here in Finland that, Mr. Toivonen, what is our worst threat at the moment? Okay, we have maybe 20 different risk or threat scenarios here, but I said that the worst threat is that we feel too comfortable. We are too blue-eyed that everything is in order. We see ourselves as very well prepared country at the moment, but we must never feel too comfortable about it. Like Riho here said that we are first line states here. We constantly need to check that everything is order, and that needs to be done in top governmental level, also in regional and local level. Maybe that would be one of the maybe ideas, and education, training, and never feel too comfortable. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, I am reminded of that quote about the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. So I think that's an important point, that particularly with countries like Finland, we have a long history of being incredible resistors against Russian aggression. It is important to keep in mind that it is possible to become too comfortable or too confident in our abilities. And then finally, Nataliya, over to you.
Thank you. I'll add 2 points to what's been discussed and one caveat. I think the first, really want to reinforce that the point about the time horizon of resistance preparation truly matters. But that does require, I think, of us to change how we assess and forecast threats, because there was a long observable trail of events that indicated Russia's efforts to control Ukraine. Similarly with Belarus, we watched over the years Russian efforts to establish control there as well, to link gains between the two, and so on. So I think building the systems, not just among policymakers, but among societies, to recognize these challenges early and truly internalize them is key. I think another lesson we learned is that stripping Russia off its information cover is essential to any resistance. And US and Ukraine, NATO, have done it successfully on a number of occasions throughout this invasion. And it matters greatly because Russia relies on narrative not just to prep the battlefield, but also it's a true offset capability to patch the gap between their objectives and quite limited means. I think we should build on that success, but also not get complacent, because there are plenty who still fall in the trap of Russian perception manipulations at the strategic level. I think similarly, Ukraine has managed to successfully undermine Russian efforts to consolidate control on the political control on the occupied territories. And we learned that Russian suppression and societal control mechanisms are not ironclad either, in part because they've gone unchallenged for many years and were suppressing increasingly oppressed people. which I think brings me to the core point about the resistance and the resilience, is that it worked well when it leveraged the core asymmetry of this war in Ukraine, the fight between free people and authoritarian model, with free people being able to wield a lot of diversified and dispersed and thus more resilient resources, and with Russia unable to improvise, at least at scale, both in the information environment and on the battlefield. And I think I'll end just with a quick caveat. I think it's not the time to solidify our frameworks, but rather to reassess them continuously as the system is in motion, and it will put us on a different historical trajectory given the scale of transformation that this war will cause to the European security, to Russia, and so on. Over.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to take some of the questions that have been fielded. First, as a little bit of background, General Fletcher, the first question will go to you. So you had started in your initial comments talking about the changing nature of NATO SOF operations. By way of context, my last deployment on active duty was as the plans director for Combined Special Operations Task Force 10 out of Afghanistan, which, as you know, was basically the construct around which many European SOF built their capabilities and then deployed them in an expeditionary fashion. And then very recently, I just returned last month as the deputy commander for the Special Operations Advisory Group out of Baghdad. Again, working in very close proximity to NATO SOF partners in a deployed environment. So with that context and building upon your initial comments about the shift from expeditionary counterterrorism, I wanted to ask a question that as NATO Special Operations Forces have been largely engaged in counterterrorism operations for the past 20 years in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, how should NATO SOF be preparing for both indirect and direct operations in the context of resistance to Russian aggression?
Hey, come here for a second. I'm not sure if you can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, sir. Did you
okay.
Have a question? Okay, over to you,
Yeah,
sir.
I dropped there for a second, so I apologize. And I think we're at the point about NATO SOF and preparing for potential future conflict. The challenge that I mentioned earlier, that many of the NATO special operations have been largely engaged in counterterrorism for the past 20 years, and so over that time period, that has been the focus. But what we've learned is that many of those skills, many of those tactics and techniques that they learn will be applicable going forward. And so, what we're focused on here is that I think one of the other panel members kind of spoke to generally is that, hey, at the end of the day, we think in a lot of ways it's just not about the equipment doesn't win the wars. It's the people that win, the will to fight, the competence, capability, and basically unity throughout this. And that may be a greater deterrence going forward than troop movement and or sanctions. And when we take a hard look at what would deter an adversary, kind of watching what plays out in Ukraine. From an NSHQ perspective, in conjunction with many of our allied and partner SOCOM commanders, we wrote a SOF subordinate strategic plan for SAC year that describes a broad set of SOF effects that we think are required in order to be successful. And those SOF effects are defined by a series of SOF tasks, which lays out for the Joint Force commanders how to best apply SOF to address the problems that they have within their battle space. And so we think that that's a good framework, a good foundational document that actually articulates exactly how best to use your SOF to achieve those desired outcomes. And so that's one of the areas in where we're focused going forward. One of the lessons learned, back to the first question as applied to your second question, is that we've watched some of the failures of the Russian army. And one of the things that jumped out to many of the practitioners here that have been within our community, SOF community, for an extended period of time, has been the lack of subordinate or junior leadership, which is built around, I think, a strong NCO corps in the U.S. Army and many of our national and SOCOM armies that are here in the alliance. And so what we're spending a lot of time is how do we professionally develop the NCO corps, junior leaders, to have mission type orders, to understand how to read and understand commander's intent and apply that, whether it's in a resistance campaign or in the conventional approach to war fighting. And so we're investing a lot of time on how do we grow, how do we educate, how do we build young adaptive leaders in order to apply many of the concepts that we've talked about today. And so from this headquarters perspective, we think SOF's real competitive advantage in many ways has been the development of those junior leaders and their ability to execute without central leadership above them. We've watched it fail for the Russian army, but we know that's essential to how you do distributed operations in a contested environment, especially in support of a resistance campaign or supporting territorial defense going forward. And so we're going to spend a lot of time and effort helping the alliance grow and develop adaptive young leaders, because we know that will be critical to NATO's and NATO, especially NATO's SOF's ability to face the uncertainty and the complexity that comes with executing resistance and/or a resistance campaign. And that's kind of what we're focused on here from a headquarters perspective. Thanks.
Thanks, sir. Great response. Nataliya, I got a question from the audience that I wanted to direct towards you. So as the United States and its NATO allies adopt integrated deterrence, does the inclusion of concepts like the resistance operating concept aid or detract from the deterrent effect insofar as it relates to the perspective of the Russian government? And in light of that question, what other recommendations might you make to better influence and deter Russian aggression?
Yeah, great question. Couple of things. One, I think the Kremlin's strategic intent isn't changed. It is to control Ukraine, is to undermine NATO, to diminish US influence, and Putin reinforced that on multiple occasions. And our planning assumption should be that that intent will persist even beyond Putin, precisely because he's investing a lot of time and effort to ensure that it does. And also because a lot of power brokers, current or potential, generally subscribe to that intent, even though they may differ on the means. I think in terms of adaptation to some of the resistance efforts that NATO has been doing, as well as Ukraine, there are a couple of things that matter. While intent is constant, I think capability is a lot more variable and a lot more interesting, therefore. And there are two questions, really. One is who is there to rethink and adapt and learn on the Russian side, and then what are they trying to do now? I think on the first one, there have been quite a few constraints in Russian ability to adapt already. And we've seen that back in 2014, given their intelligence failures in Ukraine and their inability to learn over the subsequent 8 years. Or, to Lieutenant General Fletcher's point, Russians have been trying to practice installing initiative of the lower levels for many years. But they can't, in part because the system that supports the regime is actually antithetical, in my assessment, to any meaningful adaptation. That said, there are nevertheless efforts on the Kremlin's part to pivot and adapt to kind of close the gap between their goals and their limited resources to achieve them in Ukraine and beyond. And I'll flag a couple to answer your question about what else I think can be done. I think the two one that I'll highlight is the first one, Putin, despite having destroyed a lot of the capable manpower and equipment in this phase of war in Ukraine, is not hesitating to throw more men at the problem to just stay in the game and hope to outlast the West, and then to rebuild the capability over time. So I think the two variables that will make the difference is, can Russian defense industrial base sustain this fight? And it's constrained already. Therefore, I think Western efforts to make sure it's not empowered by foreign electronics as such cannot be separated out from conversation of resistance. And similarly, any terrain that Russia gets to keep in Ukraine, especially in the south, it will use for reconstitution of its force. The final point I'll mention is, I think the effort we should be truly watching is the efforts to manipulate the perception space beyond the obvious information operations that we've already learned and adapted to, but the ones that target Western inherent characteristics like desire towards peace. Therefore, the ceasefire narrative from Russia reemerges like phoenix every couple of months, even though in this circumstance it only benefits them on the battlefield. So I think patching that adaptation on our own side and recognizing the blind spot they target is essential as well.
Thank you very much. And in fact, that cues up, I think, a good follow-on question for the Secretary General, particularly in light of Nataliya's comment about efforts to push back against information operations, Russian information operations designed to influence the population. So as you were discussing, Secretary General, a successful resistance movement depends on a nation's ability to organize and willingness to contribute, but as well as like those preparatory activities to push back in the information space in order to build deterrence against a foreign invasion. So as part of, say, Finland's total or comprehensive defense plan, how would you see that best codified within a legal framework that allows the government to do things like push back against Russian information operations?
Thank you, and thank you for the good question. And of course, in the democratic countries, you have quite limited methods of doing that one, and we have to follow that principle. But of course, idea is to win hearts and minds with the right timing information for the people and the audience. And what we also do here in Finland, due to our geographical situation as well, is that we want to enhance also the media literature education at our schools. So it's kind of well advanced done work for the maybe later issues if necessary. That's one way, but we are really concerned on the information operations, and we are following that one very closely. How the society is prepared, it's actually implemented in our security strategy for society, which also shows responsibilities for certain administrations against, for example, information operation campaigns, and that security strategy for society it's the implementation of the whole comprehensive security, also in the top political level, but also in the regional and local level. And of course, as a frontline nation, possible frontline nation, local and regional preparations are also important, and this information operation may affect that side very much. So it needs to go through the whole chain of command to the municipalities as well. Maybe I would like to go back on our preparedness, so that how we see the current situation and how we are planned for that one, and how we enhance our societal resilience. I think for Finland, the vital issue has been for decades compulsory military service, because it's one way of educating as well, and also train our people. Annually, we train 22,000 conscripts roughly to the reserve, and that's also one very vital part of this the whole picture. It's also in our legislation that all Finnish men between ages 18 and 60 are liable for military service, but also that in our constitution, every Finnish citizen is obligated to participate in national defense, either in the military or civilian side. By this compulsory military service, as a small nation by the number of the people, we have reached 900,000 military reserve, of which approximately 280,000 are for wartime troops. So we have a relatively big reserve there behind that 280,000, which can be used in other ways as well, but also as to fill in some gaps if needed. Voluntary training is vital as well, and also vital in this information operations as well. Finland is kind of a promised land for the NGOs, and we have maybe approximately 30 NGOs which are vital for us for the preparations and for example, helping us in how to counter information operation campaigns. So maybe that's it from our side. And if one question is that how we are prepared for probably like operating behind the lines, and that also goes with this military training. And for example, myself, okay, it was some years ago, being trained as a conscript for the guerrilla warfare training, and so it has been in the DNA for decades. But very good question about the information operation. It's ongoing. We see ourselves as ongoing under attack, so we need all the time counter work on that one as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Great response. And frankly, as we've seen here in the United States, the difficulties we've had in pushing back against Russian disinformation when the Department of Homeland Security was stood up some offices to work in that space. Of course, there was a lot of civil liberty concerns. So all to say that in that space, there are advantages that authoritarian regimes have that obviously us and more free societies don't have all those same advantages. And something that you said, sir, there towards the end, specifically talking about the mobilization of the population through conscription and the military training, queued up something that I wanted to ask to General Ühtegi. Given your vast experience with irregular warfare as both the former commander of all Estonian Special Operations Forces and now commanding the Estonian Defense League, how do you see the interaction and cooperation between national level SOF as part of the military and those paramilitary territorial defense forces best working to ensure both an effective deterrence and potential counter to Russian aggression?
Thank you for the question. Yes, Estonia also has conscript service, and because of that, we have in reserve plenty of men. Our operational forces are much smaller during the wartime, so we have actually some capacity to have more people taking part of defense. So when we started to create our special forces, and we decided that it must be the major power of resistance also during occupation time, then we understood immediately that we need some kind of larger partner unit. And of course, Defense League was chosen very quickly, because Defense League is a major resource for Estonian territorial defense. So Defense League itself is an organization where we don't have just only military part, but we have also so-called civilian part. Approximately half of organization adults in this organization are in case of war as combatants, and half are non-combatants. And our task here is also to provide for everyone some kind of task in case of crisis and war. So Defense League, the territorial defense part in Defense League is built up very similar way as it is in guerrilla operations. So we are focusing on small unit tactics. We are using dispersed combat activity to counter to Russian, let's say, concentrated warfare. And also we are using a lot of these territorial capabilities. We have actually, as I said, people, these fighters, they are fighting there where they are living. And to have this kind of fight going on, we need a very good actually networks surrounding these fighting parts. And this is a task of those who are not combatants in territorial defense. So we call them amplifiers. So they are people who are also trained to support combat operations, by somehow. So different tasks, logistics, observers, communication, information, so on. Very different tasks they have to do, and using them, it is like we are not just only having this military power on the ground, but they are like increasing capabilities of military power on the ground in situation. And if we are using this homeland, this part where we are living, we know this land very well. And there is a third part as well. We call them enablers. So this is a local community, this is local institutions, local NGOs and so on, who are supportive to us actually. So they can provide different kind of support also to us, and not being a part of defense organization situation. So we see that by using this kind of combination of different forces, we can be pretty much successful. And now, if we're talking about resistance situations, so when we fall under enemy's occupation, then all these networks are still available. So we can use the same houses, we can use same caches, we can use same storages, same people, same observators and so on. So this is basically very good basis also for special forces to create actually a resistance movement on the ground, a military resistance movement. And also, as most of our members in Defense League, they learn also about non-violent resistance. So everyone, it is allowed that every member of Defense League must know what is non-violent resistance. So they can actually also create bigger resistance capabilities by calling up, let's say, their own networks, personal networks, and by using them. And in this situation, we see that it's very beneficial for special forces to have this kind of force on the ground. And also for territorial defense, special forces are very useful because they are bringing to the ground, let's say, knowledge, and not only knowledge, but also very important assets. Because if we are talking about territorial defense, these are light units, and SOF has actually access to huge firepower to allied forces and so on. So this is like two sides game, and we see that we both can be very beneficial to each other. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. And we'll have time for one more question before we close. Nataliya, I'm going to direct this one to you, particularly as we've seen the Russians begin their withdrawal from Kherson City, an attempt to use their mobilized conscripts to dig in defensive lines as winter sets in. So there is a possibility that the conflict could become more frozen in eastern Ukraine. If that were to be the case and Russia were to actually retain some of their territory, what role would you see irregular warfare playing in eventually liberating those areas held moving forward into the future?
Yeah, thank you. I think first, of course, I think the priority should be to help expel Russians from those areas while Ukraine maintains the initiative on the ground. But secondly, the irregular warfare already played actually, I think, significant role in preventing Russian ability to consolidate political control in the occupied areas. You know, there is military control, but if we talk about elements of political control, its ability to govern and administer, as well as ability to establish information control of those areas. And Ukrainian resistance has undermined Russian effort to rely on local collaborators, which actually strained a lot of Russian administrative ability on the ground. And I think that will be increasingly important to ensure it happens on the remainder of the occupied territories. And then secondly, you know, a lot of authoritarian regimes have advantages in information space, but they also have vulnerabilities, in part because they rely so much on the narrative to control societies. and resistance and stripping Russia of ability to rely on local collaborators to the point that they hope for, also strip them of this false narrative that they were protecting the local population and working together with them. So I think it already played a significant role, and we should not underestimate the role it can play in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Nataliya. Great response. And then before we wrap up Q&A, General Fletcher, if you have any closing comments.
Yeah, I just want to hit on something to make sure those that are listening in kind of get a complete or holistic image of resistance and the effect it could or could not have on a campaign. Hey, first, I'm speaking as a NATO theater soft component, but I would be remiss if I didn't at least highlight that not every nation in the alliance sees resistance as an acceptable mission set for its soft and or its military. And so I think NATO writ large speaks more to resiliency of the society to withstand strategic shock. Although we see that as a legit, realistic concept, not every nation sees the same. So I would just keep that in the back of your mind as you think about resistance campaigns. Additionally, there's a unique set of authorities that come with executing a resistance campaign and a resistance. Every nation is a little bit different where those forces reside and how they're employed. And so I would always also be very informed about the strategic environment which you're entering, and when you discuss resistance or resistance campaigns. And then lastly, we have to guard against glamorizing resistance, because it does come at a cost sometimes. You can look throughout history when we've weaponized your citizenry to a degree, it does come at a cost. And so resistance, your civilians taking up arms, now transitions them from non-combatants to combatants, and that comes at a cost. And so it is and can be an effective campaign. It can be something that's critical and maybe what the nation has to resort to defend itself from occupation and or an invasion. But we have to approach it very clear-eyed about some of the consequences that come with executing a resistance campaign. And so just want to put that out there so we understand that from every commander, every leadership perspective, there are risks involved with every approach you take to warfighting. And we can't overlook those that come with executing a resistance campaign as well. Over. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. And at this time, I will hand it back over to Andy and Guido. Thank you so much for your attendance.
Thanks. Before closing our event, I'd like to give a special congratulations to our United States Marine Corps celebrating its 247th birthday today. And thank you, Lieutenant General Fletcher, Brigadier General Ühtegi, Secretary General Toivonen, and Mrs. Bugayova for taking the time to join us virtually for this engaging, complex, and important discussion.
The team at IWI aim to support the community of irregular warfare professionals by generating the Irregular Warfare podcast, which releases every 2 weeks, written articles by members of the community like you, a fellows program, and of course, events like this to bring the irregular warfare professional community together to talk about important contemporary issues. If you haven't already, please sign up to receive our monthly email newsletter summarizing this content.
A reminder, this session has been recorded and will be released on the IWI website and social media channels. And thank you to all of our attendees for taking time out of your day to watch. Your attendance and support help to make programs like this possible.